What's going on, guys? My name's Robbo, and we're here to do a just chatting stream. Alright, I've been hyping this one a bit. I've been fiddling all day with different technology and things. I think I've finally got a system that works. The audio should be working well. The video needs some work, but I've got the ring light going. We're using Twitch Studio Beta, but Twitch Studio Beta here seems to work pretty well. So that's what we're going with tonight. And yeah, this is one of those things I'm trying out. I would love to get to the point where I can do maybe a weekly just chatting stream, just talking about wrestling. Because I've been using Twitch to play games and I enjoy games. I really do. I love my video games. But I don't have the same passion for video games as I have for pro wrestling. Anyone that knows me even vaguely well knows that I fucking love pro wrestling more than just about anything in the world. So the idea was that I would start this series of just chatting things about different wrestling topics. And it's also good practice for me. Over the past couple of months, I've started doing some writing for the Snapmares media team. And last week, or maybe the week before now, I was able to take part in the PWA preview show, where we previewed the final of the PWA Premiership tournament that I've been writing reviews for every week on Statmare's website. And so, just about almost exact same setup as it is tonight, except we were using Zoom. It was me, commentator and ring announcer from Melbourne, MCW, Lord Andy Coyne. We also had radio host and PWA commentator Andy Rose, and we had me. And I was shitting bricks. I was so nervous about doing it all. I feel like it went pretty well. I watched it back and I was kind of a bit critical on myself, just saying too many times. I also threw in a lot of knows, and I was super worried about the speed of my voice. I am notorious for going and speaking way too fast, whether it's just in general social situations, whether it's at work. It's just a thing where I mumble or talk too fast. Yeah, these Just Chatting streams about pro wrestling. It's my chance to talk about wrestling and things I love talking about, get more comfortable on camera, and the timing of this is ridiculous. I've got a visitor. I never have a visitor ever. 1 second. Alright, I think we are back. Let's check the mic. Let's make sure we're on. Yep, the mic is on and we are back. Alright, as I was saying before I got so rudely interrupted. Okay, that's my neighbour. He locked himself out of his house. Good thing I've got a spare key. Alright, so yeah, what tonight's all about, it's about the best wrestling shows ever. I wrote a article about this about 2.5 years ago now, so it's a fairly long time ago, but I pretty much detailed my top 10 favorite pay-per-views ever. I didn't say best because best, especially in wrestling, it's subjective, so what I might think might be the best show might not be to someone else's tastes, and vice versa. Really depends on what you like. I feel like the things I like in my wrestling shows, I like a varied show. I like a show that has a bit of everything. It's that theory of the three-ring circus. If you don't like the clowns, you like the acrobats. If you don't like the clowns or the acrobats, you might like the animals. There's something for everyone. So I wrote that article, so that is going to be the basis of most of what I talk about today. I have made some amendments to that list since then. The big thing since I wrote the article to mix top 10 favorite pay-per-views ever, it was before AEW was a thing. So All Elite Wrestling, AEW, has come on the block in 2019, and they do feature on my list of best pay-per-views ever. I think that's a credit to Tony Khan, a credit to Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, the Elite. they have provided several pay-per-views where you definitely get your bang for your buck, no pun intended. But we'll go through. I don't have an exact order, except for my top one. My top one is my undisputed top one. I don't know if it'll ever be beaten. If you've paid attention to my stories on Instagram and Facebook since I started advertising and hyping this stream, I did drop a few of the pay-per-views I'd be talking about today. So I had my top 10, I made some additions. There's AEW, there's also New Japan, so I've started watching NJPW in the past couple of years, and a couple of those events feature as well. And then I go back into the vault just to give some representation to some classic ECW shows and even some WCW. I was never the biggest WCW fan. It wasn't that I didn't like it, it was just that I was a WWF/WWE guy all the way through. So I've been grinding, I've been working out this Twitch Studio Beta program. I've been working out what I'm going to say in this stream. I've taken some notes. I actually spent the afternoon writing notes because of course, they're my favorites. I know what my favorites are, but just to add that extra bit of detail, I went and wrote down the match card for the events I'm talking about. There's a couple I remember every single match back to front, and there's a couple where they're my favorites because the top matches stood out, and I don't remember the undercard all that well in comparison, but the strength of the top matches was enough to make it a favorite show. And like, as much as I know my wrestling and love my wrestling, you can't expect me to remember every match on every show for the past 25 years I've been watching whatever it is. Alright, so I guess I'll start with, I did have a top 10 in my top 10 list. I'll kind of rattle them off in rough order of what I had them as. So coming in at number 10 on my original article, even though I stressed that none of these are in exact order today, apart from the top one. So if I check my notes here, see, I've got whole notes of all my stuff. These are all the shows and all the matches we're talking about. So as you might imagine, it's quite a big undertaking. Let's see if I can. Let's see them perfect before. Okay, there we go. My books. Okay, so a little insight into how my stream works. I don't have big budget equipment. Obviously, I'm just using my laptop webcam. I'm looking to get in a better webcam soon, better microphone, all that stuff. I don't even have a tripod. My laptop is sitting on a bar stool, and on the sort of footrest on my bar stool is my book with all my notes. Okay, so coming in number 10 on my original list, but again, I stress there's no exact order to what I'm doing now. It's WWE Backlash 2007. Okay, so that was in the middle of the Ruthless Aggression era, and something they did in the Ruthless Aggression era was they brought in single brand pay-per-views. So Raw and SmackDown became separate shows. So I think it started in 2003 with Bad Blood. They started having their own single brand pay-per-views. Raw had Bad Blood, SmackDown had Vengeance, and so on, and they would come together for the big four of Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. Backlash 2007 was when they went back on the single brand pay-per-views and said, alright, all the brands of WWE are back together. So in 2007, in April, it was Raw was a brand, SmackDown was a brand, and also WWE's version of ECW was its own third brand. WWE's ECW only had one single brand pay-per-view. It's remembered as one of the worst shows of all time. ECW, December to Dismember 2006. It was a dumpster fire. It is the exact opposite of what this entire stream is about, which is about the best shows of all time. Like I said, it's subjective. Everyone's got their favorites. One of the reasons I love Backlash is its quality over quantity. So on the whole pay-per-view, there's only 6 matches. If you look at especially modern day WWE, they fill the entire card with, it's so bloated, it's so many matches, especially shows like WrestleMania. I think WrestleMania 35 had like 16 matches. Obviously WrestleMania 36, they made a 2-night event. but that was more to do with COVID. So Backlash 07, 6 matches. You start off with the Tag Team Championships on the line. WWE have never been massive on their tag team division, but one of the few tag teams that really rose to superstar status was the Hardy Boys. Matt Hardy and Jeff Hardy, my favorite tag team of all time. They were in the opening match on Backlash 2007, going for the Raw Tag Team Championships, or they might be defending championships, but they faced Cade and Murdoch. The Hardy Boys beat Cade and Murdoch to either retain or win the Raw Tag Team Championships, and one of the big moments in that was the Hardys do the poetry of motion, but instead of Jeff getting, Cade and Murdoch in the corner, Matt bent down for his part of the poetry in motion, and Jeff Hardy launched over the ropes to the outside to hit poetry in motion on Cade and Murdoch. Talk about a suicide dive. I don't know how Jeff Hardy is still walking, let alone competing at the level he still does today in WWE. So that was your opener. Really hot start to the card. Hardy Boys are a great choice as an opening act to really get the crowd fired up. And then you had the women's division. You had Mickie James defending the championship against Melina. And that was a great match. We talk about the women's revolution, and WWE kind of retroactively trying to attribute the entire success of the women's revolution, whatever, to the 4 horsewomen of NXT, Bayley, Sasha Banks, Charlotte Flair, and Becky Lynch. And while they had a massive amount to do with it, you can't totally discredit the work that the ladies in the Ruthless Aggression era did. You had people like Victoria, who returned at the Royal Rumble. You had Trish and Lita, obviously, the Hall of Famers. And you had Melina and Mickie James, who were really underrated talents, absolute legends in their own right. I'd love to see Melina back. The athleticism, the drama, they went all out. You got to remember, this was still a time when WWE were doing the bra and panty matches. It was like wrestling moves. You're a woman. We don't want to see wrestling moves. We want to see you in your bra and panties. We want to see boobs. We want to see TNA. Mickie and Melina, they brought sexuality, but they brought the action. They were serious wrestlers as well. They could kick all the ass, and kick all the ass they did. So Melina defeated Mickie James in that women's championship match. So 2 matches, 2 championships, 2 great championship level matches. Okay, then we had the United States Championship on the line. It's a rematch from WrestleMania where we had Chris Benoit defending the United States Championship against MVP. So obviously Chris Benoit died in 2007. He died a couple of months after this match. But his last big program before the tragedy where double murder suicide, he killed himself, killed his wife, killed his kid. His last big program in wrestling was with MVP over the US title, and they had great chemistry. I mean, Chris Benoit as a wrestler, you can't fault him. He had great matches with everyone. The WrestleMania match was a pleasant surprise because up to that point, MVP hadn't really had many good matches with anyone. He had sort of a lumbering feud with Kane prior to that, but Benoit made him put his working boots on. Backlash was more of the same, and I believe Benoit retained here. Yeah, Benoit retained in this one, yep. And it wasn't until Judgment Day in a 2 out of 3 falls match where MVP would finally get it done. But Benoit and MVP make it 3 to 3, great championship matches, great action, back and forth, intensity all the way. Technique and aggression. Ruthless aggression, if you will. Alright, this brings us to a little bit of fuckery, but I get a kick out of this fuckery, so it's okay. It doesn't really ruin my favorite pay-per-view status. Like I said, the ECW brand was revived under the WWE umbrella, and it was very different ECW to the one we know and love from the late 90s, early 2000s. So going into this show at Backlash, the reigning ECW champion was Bobby Lashley. He competed at WrestleMania in the Battle of the Billionaires. He represented Donald Trump, boo hiss, and faced Umaga, with Vince McMahon obviously in his corner. So the Lashley vs McMahon's saga continued after WrestleMania, and here we have a handicap match for the ECW Championship. We had Lashley defending the ECW Championship against Vince McMahon, Shane McMahon, and Umaga. And in the end, it's 3-on-1. Umaga did most of the heavy lifting. Shane did a couple of spots. And then ultimately, Vince McMahon gets in there and covers Lashley and becomes the ECW champion. So Extreme Championship Wrestling, remember the legacy, or if you don't know the legacy, look it up. The legacy of ECW, and Mr. McMahon held the ECW Championship. He held it a bit longer than he held the WWE Championship, and this was during a time when Vince had his head shaved. And to hide his shaved head, he was wearing a do-rag, like a bandana on his head. So in the immediate aftermath, that made me jump. It's the first time I've had this alerts on. Thank you, Hoodmark, for the follow. So the first time we sort of see Vince's version of ECW come to life, and we see Vince in his do-rag wearing an ECW championship, which pissed off a lot of hardcore ECW marks. So we had, from RVD to Sabu to Sandman to Ryder, RVD, all those guys, and then you had Vince. So it didn't really go down well, wasn't a popular decision, but it made me laugh because we had Vince in this do-rag looking ridiculous as the Extreme Championship Wrestling Champion. Alright, so, not as technically great as the first 3 matches, but it was still a lot of fun. New Orleans, Louisiana, awesome. Love to see it. Thank you so much. I'm from just south of Sydney, Australia, so I really appreciate you stopping in. I know it must be late where you are, so thank you very much for stopping by. Hope you're having a great night or day, whatever time it is where you are. Alright, so then we've had all championship matches. Backlash 2007. It's in my top 10, or was in my top 10 favorite pay-per-views of all time. I have amended it. So my list is based, if you weren't here earlier, my list is based on an article I wrote from my little blog about 2.5 years ago. So it was pre-AEW, it was before I got into New Japan as well. So I wrote this article of my top 10 favorite pay-per-views. So it's pretty much what I'm presenting tonight, as well as some amendments to account for the present day since I wrote that article. So Backlash 2007, was all thriller, no filler. We had 6 great matches, well, to me, they're great. So we had the Tag Team Championships, we had the Women's Championship, we had the ECW Championship, and the United States Championship. Then the top 2 matches were big-time WrestleMania rematches. We had Batista versus The Undertaker for the World Heavyweight Championship, but this time it was last man standing. It was physical, it was hard-hitting, kind of like WrestleMania. You got the sense that Batista and Taker were looking to prove a point. They were looking to show that they should have been the main event. They should have had all the headline spots. They didn't get it at WrestleMania. They were in the middle of the card, and they were co-main event here at Backlash. And the match was really intense, and it ended up as a draw. So that feud would keep going, and in hindsight, a good move having Batista vs Taker as the co-main, since we didn't get a decisive finish. That brings us to the main event, which was about as stacked as you could get in 2007 on the Raw brand. We had a fatal 4-way for the WWE Championship. The defending champion John Cena defended the title against HBK, Shawn Michaels, and rated RKO, Edge, and Randy Orton. This was non-stop. The finish to this match was just finisher after finisher after finisher. It was like the WWE 2K games with everyone's finishes maxed out. So it was just so much fun, and the action never stopped. You never had a chance to catch your breath. Ultimately, Cena almost lucks into the pinfall, retains the championship against 3 of Raw's best. So Backlash 2007, I'd recommend that to everyone, pretty much. Just if you want to, especially if you didn't watch WWE at that time, it's like the perfect snapshot of what WWE was in April 2007. Alright, so that brings us to, I mentioned at the start that in the Ruthless Aggression era around this time, WWE had their single brand pay-per-views. One of the best single brand pay-per-views they ever did, in my opinion, was Unforgiven 2006. So that took place in Toronto, Canada, right after SummerSlam. And of course, Toronto, Canada was Edge's hometown. Edge beat Cena at SummerSlam and rebranded the WWE Championship the Rated R Championship, and ended up being Edge versus Cena in a TLC match in Edge's hometown. So that's a pretty massive main event for a single brand Raw pay-per-view, and just having that on top in an average undercard would have still made it a really good show. But TLC wasn't enough. They had to go and put a Hell in a Cell match in there as well. We had the reunited DX, Triple H and Shawn Michaels taking on the McMahons, Vince McShane, and The Big Show. So a handicap Hell in a Cell match. So TLC, Hell in a Cell, yeah, that's got to be enough to get your blood pumping right. That's enough to be a great pay-per-view. That wasn't it. Once again, we're in Toronto. Who's another big star to come out of Toronto? The resident bombshell, Trish Stratus. Trish Stratus had her retirement match here, facing Lita for the Women's Championship. So that's 3 massive matches on a single brand pay-per-view. And the undercard was nothing to sneeze at either. Jeff Hardy returned to the WWE a few weeks earlier, right after SummerSlam. He faced Johnny Nitro for the IC title. Nitro would win, but it was a great sort of first step in the feud between Nitro, the future John Morrison, and Jeff Hardy. Then we had Kane versus Umaga, sort of big man in the big hoss battle we had going. That ended in a double count out, but it was still fun seeing Kane and Umaga throw hands. This is when Kane was still in great shape. He was still pretty much in his prime. He was defying down the card a bit, and Umaga was on the way up, but that was still a fun brawl. Then we had the Spirit Squad. Remember the Spirit Squad? Remember Nikki and Mikey and Kenny? Who am I missing? Mitch, the Megaphone. So I like the Spirit Squad. Some people hated them. I got a kick out of them. I thought they were good comic relief. So the Spirit Squad defeated the Highlanders to retain the World Tag Team Championships. Then we had the Hell in a Cell. We had DX defeating the McMahons and Big Show. And DX shoved Vince McMahon's head up Big Show's ass. Not something I love to see, but hey, it's a memorable moment. And one thing that makes a great wrestling pay-per-view is memorable moments. And it was actually really bloody and intense. I watched it back recently, and I'd forgotten how bloody it was. I think maybe because I've been watching PG WWE for so long, I hadn't realized just how intense Ruthless Aggression was in comparison. So that was great. That could have main evented in its own right, honestly. Then we had Trish defeating Lita in her retirement match to become the 7-time Women's Champion. And that was raw emotion. So everyone in the building loved Trish. Toronto sometimes gets a rap for being bizarro world and booing people that it shouldn't boo and cheering people it shouldn't cheer. But they gave nothing but love to their hometown girl in her final match. And Lita had her best match of that entire year, for sure. And Trish wins in her retirement match with the sharpshooter, shouting out another famous Canadian, Bret the Hitman Hart. Good, love it. Excellently executed. Alright, and then that brings us to a match which kind of has a little more significance now, because as of yesterday, both the men are now back on the WWE roster. So it was Carlito who just returned in the Royal Rumble. Carlito returned and faced Randy Orton, who of course has never left WWE, and it was one of the first RKOs out of nowhere. Carlito goes for this big springboard move, and Orton just catches him mid-leap with the RKO. It's awesome. It's what seemed like a filler match, what seemed like an undercard match, and it was an undercard match, but it was meant to be just filler, just give you a minute to catch your breath before the big TLC match in the main event. But it really stood out because of that. That was one of the first RKOs out of nowhere, I remember. Of course, Orton had the RKO, but it wasn't as big as that. So, really cool to see. Then that brings us to the main event, Cena vs. Edge. Of course, Edge getting all the cheese in Toronto, being the hometown boy. Cena getting booed out of the building, and I feel like that would have happened even if it wasn't in Toronto. This was around a time when crowds really started turning on Cena, regardless of where he was. I'm pretty sure Cena got booed in Boston the month before at SummerSlam. So yeah, Cena was not a liked person. That was when the whole Cena sucks thing really started. And yeah, but they went all out. They took some massive bumps. They really went for it. Even Lita got involved and took a massive bump in that match, if I do remember. And the finish was huge. Cena getting Edge on top of the ladder, giving him what was then the FU, now it's called the AA, damn PG, WWE. He does the FU off the top of the ladder through 2 tables stacked. Edge falls through them both, crumples like a heap of shit. Cena takes back his WWE Championship. I mean, again, this was a single brand pay-per-view. It was Unforgiven in September. Those shows aren't meant to be great. They're just meant to be kind of filler. You know, between SummerSlam and the Rumble, it's usually filler shows that don't amount to much. You might get your occasional great thing. If they're going to give you some good shit, pal, they're going to give it to you at Survivor Series. But no, stuck right in September, Unforgiven. WWE knocked it out of the park. The Raw brand representing. Alright, so that was pretty much, was it? It's 9 and 10 on my list, I believe, if I look back at my best ones of all time. Alright, I've got the article here. I don't want to rely on the article too much, that's why I took notes. Yeah, and I didn't think this was as far down, but when I consider what's ahead, this does make sense. Alright, so coming in at number 8 on my original list, and bearing in mind these aren't concrete anymore, the only one that is concrete for me still is the number 1 spot, which we'll get to. But coming in at number 8 originally was WWE Survivor Series 2002. So obviously Survivor Series, Big 4 pay-per-view, it's fairly loaded. It was back when WWE still took Survivor Series very seriously. It's been a few times in recent years when Survivor Series hasn't really got the respect it deserves as the Big 4 pay-per-view. There was even rumors that they were talking about getting rid of Survivor Series completely, and Money in the Bank would become the next Big 4 pay-per-view. So that was a possibility. And yeah, this was a big time Survivor Series. This was right near the start of the Ruthless Aggression era, and it took place in Madison Square Garden. One of the reasons this show stands out for me is that it's kind of like Backlash 07 that we talked about before. It's quality over quantity. It's only 6 matches too. The main event was the first ever Elimination Chamber. So of course now today the Elimination Chamber is a staple of WWE pay-per-views and has its own themed pay-per-view. Survivor Series 2002 was the very first one, and we had a stacked field in that match. We had Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho, Kane, Booker T, and Rob Van Dam. So 6 of the best on Raw, no doubt. This was a couple of months after Triple H had been awarded the World Heavyweight Championship by Eric Bischoff. And yeah, it was the first time we ever saw a match like this. This was done in response to SmackDown having a Hell in a Cell match between Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker the month before at No Mercy. And Eric Bischoff said, nope, we're going to top that. Here's the Elimination Chamber. So I love that. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But we had a pretty loaded card top to bottom. The opening match was a Elimination Tables match. We had a sort of odd couple team of Bubba Ray Dudley, Spike Dudley, and Jeff Hardy. So Dudleys and Hardys on the same side in a tables match in Madison Square Garden, almost 3 years after their iconic tables match at the Royal Rumble. And so, and then, Spike in there as well, being the Crash Test Dummy. They faced 3-Minute Warning and Rico. And one of the things this match is remembered for is a kind of botch fuck up, where Jeff Slate coming to a spot, he's meant to shake Rico off the ropes when Rico attempts a moonsault. But Jeff's late, so Rico has to stand on the top rope, pretending to try and get his balance, and Jeff's just way too late for the spot. And it gets to the point where Rico yells out, "God damn it, Jeff!" And that's edited out on the network, but I remember watching it on VHS, recorded from live broadcast. It was glorious. But yeah, lots of big spots. Jeff Hardy does the big swanton off the Madison Square Garden entrance. And then at the end of the match, we get a Dudley Boys reunion as Bubba Ray and Devon Dudley reunite. Devon, of course, was over on SmackDown doing the Reverend gimmick. Dudley Boys got done in the first brand split, and Bubba was a singles guy as well. It wasn't really working on both sides, but especially for Devon. So they stuck the Dudleys back together in the Garden. Great moment, great pop to start the show. And also it's cool to see Rosie and Jamal in their 3-Minute Warning. Highly underrated tag team, and rest in peace to both men. Really sad to think about. They've both passed away They came on the scene in 2002 as young guys, and now we're here, 18 years later, and they're both gone from this world, which is really sad. Yeah, so that's the opening match, and then we had the Cruiserweight Championship on the line. Billy Kidman versus Jamie Noble. Jamie Noble was doing his trailer park gimmick at the time of Lydia. Kidman debuts his sick new music, that na na Kidman, do what you want to, you run if you want to, that sort of deal. And Kidman wins the match. Pretty straightforward stuff, but good cruiserweight action. At the time, it really stood out. It'd be a pretty standard match nowadays, but in 2002, you didn't see that kind of stuff as often. And then Kidman wins with the shooting star press, so really good work all around. And then we get a hardcore match for the Women's Championship. Like I said earlier during the Backlash recap, the Women's Revolution started before the Four Horsewomen. Trish and Victoria really brought it here. I'm glad Victoria's gotten some of the respect she deserves, getting the Rumble return this past week. But yeah, Trish and Victoria went at it for this hardcore match. They put some silly gimmicky stuff in there because they're women. Some of the hardcore items, you had like an ironing board and stuff because they're women and they clean and get in the kitchen, women. But despite that, they still made it physical, they still made it intense. They took it deadly seriously. And apart from a slight botch, they meant to use a fire extinguisher in the finish, and it kind of gets botched, but still great physical match. I think both of them get little busted up noses, and Victoria wins the Women's Championship. It's a great moment for Victoria, who's pretty new to the roster at the time, and Trish adds to her ledger of great matches at the time. Okay, so brings me to here, just checking my notes. So now we go to Money in the Bank. Money in the Bank 2011. Now this is an interesting one to talk about because I wasn't a WWE fan at the time. Between 2008 and 2012, I really went off WWE. The PG direction just really soured me on the whole thing. I saw after the Benoit tragedy, I can't speak tonight, the double murder suicide, WWE started really cleaning up their image, less blood, less adult content, and it was more and more marketed towards kids and families, and it was just too squeaky clean. And I still argue today that pro wrestling, it's about adults having a physical conflict. You can't make that too squeaky clean. You can't make that Disney. It just doesn't work. So we're seeing all these silly skits and shit like Hornswoggle and Santino, just like Disney, it's really kiddie, squeaky clean, friendly stuff. La la la, Teletubby shit. And the final straw for me was John Cena in 2008, feuding with JBL. He spray paints on JBL's limo the words, "JBL is poopy." And that was the final straw for me. I was gone from WWE for a good 4 years. But I did sort of stick my head back in and out here and there. I checked out like the Rumble and Mania, but I wasn't watching religiously like every week like I used to. And then I heard about CM Punk. So CM Punk, someone I followed before I dropped out of wrestling completely. He rose up the ranks in the ECW brand before becoming the World Heavyweight Champion after winning Money in the Bank in 2008 and 9, was it? Around that time. And so yeah, I liked CM Punk, but he was doing something different to everyone else. In real life, his contract was coming up, and he was given a live microphone and told he could air his grievances. And that led to the infamous pipe bomb. The pipe bomb from CM Punk, that great work shoot program, I guess, that captured my attention and that got me to tune into Money in the Bank. And man, it was in Chicago, one of the best wrestling towns there is. And man, they killed it. The main event of Punk vs. Cena, it was given 5 stars by Dave Meltzer, and it deserved it. It was a perfect match in every way. You had this complete good versus evil dichotomy, except CM Punk was going in as a heel and Cena as a face, but the electricity from the crowd forced a complete role reversal. It was kind of like Hogan vs. Rock in Toronto, except I'm sure in the Money in the Bank 2011 case, they were kind of expecting the crowd to be pro-Punk and anti-Cena, but it was still fascinating because Cena was the face of the company at the time, CM Punk was just dastardly heel, and they totally flipped the script for that one match in the All-State Arena. And of course, the iconic finish: CM Punk beats Cena clean with the GTS, leaves through the crowd with the WWE Championship, blows Vince a kiss, and he's gone from the company for a couple of weeks. But in the moment, it was magical. Then you had the two Money in the Bank matches: Del Rio winning the Raw one, Daniel Bryan winning the SmackDown one. Both of those matches were all action, just chef's perfection, chef's kiss, all that stuff. Then we also had Mark Henry and Big Show having a good old house battle. We had the Divas Championship, Kelly Kelly versus Brie Bella. I'm not going to pretend that one was a technical masterpiece, but you can always get some enjoyment out of watching Kelly Kelly do basically anything, even if she wasn't the world's greatest wrestler. Then we had Christian versus Randy Orton. They had a great series in 2011 over the World Heavyweight Championship. Christian beats Orton after Orton gets DQ'd, but the stipulation was that if Orton got DQ'd, Christian would win the World Heavyweight Championship. So that's what happened. Great match, great chemistry, great twist ending. And did I miss anything here? No, that's pretty much it. That's Money in the Bank 2011. Even though I wasn't a big fan of WWE as a whole at the time, they captured lightning in a bottle with the Punk vs Cena feud and match, and a strong undercard with the Money in the Bank matches especially. Alright, so that brings me to a drink break because I am losing my voice rapidly. I have talked non-stop for about the past 47 minutes. I've got my Coke for caffeine, or Pepsi. CM Punk, shout out to CM Punk, drinking that sugar-free Pepsi. But see, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling energized. I'm talking about wrestling. It's what I love. I could talk about wrestling all day if someone gives me the opportunity. And even if I'm just talking to myself, it's still something I enjoy. So screw it. I'm going to do things that makes me happy. I think that's a secret to a good life as I get older. I am 30 now. I'm in my 30s. It feels weird. I still mentally feel like I'm 12 or 15. I still laugh at inappropriate jokes. I still crack way more jokes than I should, especially at work. And it's just a whole mess. So yeah, those are some of my top matches, top pay-per-views, which obviously include some top matches. And I'm having trouble seeing my whole thing here. Oh, there it is. Alright, talked about single brand pay-per-views. Next one's a bit of an odd case. Vengeance 2005. So it was a Raw brand pay-per-view, technically. But it happened in the middle of the WWE draft, which meant that we had people on the show that would get drafted to SmackDown a week later. And it actually happened in a way where we had both the WWE Championship on the line, and we also had the World Heavyweight Championship on the line. So Batista was holding things down as the World Heavyweight Champion. He won the World Heavyweight Championship from Triple H at WrestleMania 21. He would retain the championship at Backlash, and Vengeance 2005, Triple H gets his third and final shot, and it's inside Hell in a Cell. And yeah, it was an awesome match. One thing about this show, and that match particularly, it's quite violent, and I feel like that was a response to ECW One Night Stand, which happened about 2 weeks before Vengeance. So I think this is kind of WWE saying, okay, well, that show was really well received. Let me show you that WWE can go extreme as well. WWE can be hardcore as well. So they pushed the envelope a bit. I was one of the rare pay-per-views that got an MA15 rating because, Batista vs Triple H was violent as fuck. They had barbed wire steel chairs. They had Triple H hanging Batista by his throat with a chain, basically hanging him like a noose, but it was a steel chain. You never see that in a post-Benoit world. Like Daniel Bryan got fired for choking Justin Roberts with his tie. Even Edge and Randy Orton got a bit of controversy for doing a sort of half-hanging spot in their last man standing at this past year's WrestleMania. So they really went for it, both men bleeding buckets, and the finish was a great one with Batista going for the Batista bomb. Triple H had the sledgehammer up like he was going to counter with the sledgehammer and just strike down with great vengeance upon me. But Batista pulled the trigger first, hits a Batista bomb, retains the World Heavyweight Championship. Then in the semi-main event, we had the WWE Championship on the line. John Cena, Raw's newest acquisition, the WWE Champion, defends his championship against Chris Jericho and Christian in a triple threat match. I love Chris Jericho. He's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. But still it annoys me that Chris Jericho was put in that match. They'd been building literally for the past 6 months, cross-brand, a Cena vs. Christian feud. So I would have loved to see Cena vs. Christian one-on-one here. It didn't happen. We never got it because Christian ended up leaving when we got drafted to SmackDown after this match. And then he just went further and further down the card. And then he requested his release in October. He was granted it and went to TNA for a few years. So we never got Cena vs. Christian one-on-one after that great feud they'd had, doing little raps on each other. It was a great time. But yeah, they had a triple threat match, Cena, Jericho, Christian. And it was a great match. Jericho and Christian, they don't have bad matches. And Cena was still early in his main event development, but Christian and Jericho really kept the action flowing and made Cena look good in the end, retaining his championship after hitting the FU/AA. And we also had, because Vengeance 2005 was in Las Vegas, we had a cameo appearance by the Godfather. It's a bit of a weird segment with Viscera was the love machine and he was proposing to Lillian Garcia, the ring announcer, and it seems like Lillian and Viscera are going to get married, but Godfather interrupts and says, "No, come and take a ride on the hoe train," and Viscera does because he can't resist the hoes. So it was a good time. It's funny you mentioned that. So the one I'm talking about now, Vengeance 05, happened about 2 weeks after ECW One Night Stand, and I couldn't agree more. I've really got to get used to that sound. This is the first time I'm doing Twitch Studio Beta, and so it's the first time I'm hearing that follow sound. Thank you very much for the follow. ECW One Night Stand. I was going to save this for later, but since you're here and we're talking about it, I'd probably put ECW One Night Stand as my second favorite pay-per-view of all time. It's so much fun. I didn't even follow ECW that closely when it was first around. I didn't have access to it. I first saw ECW in like 2003. I saw some ECW DVDs in like a discount bin at a dollar store, and yeah, it was great. It was Guilty as Charged 2000 and Hardcore Heaven 2000. I got them both for $5 each on DVD. But ECW One Night Stand was one of my first exposures to ECW, and even though I wasn't a fan in the original days, I didn't follow it as it happened, it was still super emotional to see that. It was still amazing because we had, from the moment it started with Joey Styles, and you could see the emotion on Joey Styles' face, how much it meant to him to be back there with those rabid ECW fans in the Hammerstein Ballroom. It was the kind of emotion and passion that, I think Mick Foley even said this later on commentary, WWE just didn't have that. It's even worse now, but WWE just didn't have that kind of passion or emotion. ECW did, and then you have that passion, you have that emotion, you have that nostalgia, and then you have some damn good wrestling. That's the thing. ECW, it always gets a bad rap. It always gets a bit of a bad rap in terms of, okay, it's just hardcore wrestling. That's garbage wrestling. It's not. They had so many different styles. They had so many different ways of doing things. And you saw that opening match was Chris Jericho versus Lance Storm. Chris Jericho coming out in the Lionheart thing, really understanding that nostalgia, facing Lance Storm. And yeah, Edge pinning Beulah McGillicuddy. Yeah, that was the second one night stand that happened when Edge pinned Tommy Dreamer's wife, Willa McGillicuddy. But that was that was weird to watch that one. I enjoyed the second one night stand as well. But yeah, seeing Edge pin Dreamer's wife like that, basically fucking her into the mat, it was kind of you kind of like, okay then, you know, it's I mean obviously she would have agreed to do it, but still seems super sus. And hey, the ECW fans, they hated it. Edge and Foley were the biggest heels in that match and in the building. Remember when Foley was like, he started praising the great innovative leader of ECW, and it was, praise be to Stephanie McMahon, long live the Alliance. It was great. But yeah, the original one, the '05 one, that was when, in the main event of the first one, the 2005 one, it was Dreamer and Sandman versus the Dudleys. And yeah, yes, Cena and RVD on 2006 One Night Stand as well. That was awesome. If Cena wins, we riot. you can't you can't manufacture that kind of passion. It's like they get that a bit in Chicago and when they go to Madison Square Garden in WWE. But yeah, the Hammerstein Ballroom, the ECW fans, was just something different. It was special. It was not something that we were accustomed to seeing, especially if you didn't follow the original ECW. Like I didn't, I just didn't have access, and I was probably a bit too young. There was times when my mum would not let me watch WWE because it was the Attitude Era and the bra and panty matches and some over the top stuff of DX or Suck It and all that. So yeah, there's no way in hell I would have been allowed to watch ECW when I was like 8, 9, 10, whatever. But yeah, One Night Stand special. And then we had all the different styles of wrestling, like Jericho and Storm, great technical battle. We had Super Crazy versus Tajiri versus Little Guido, just hard hitting sort of strong style, lucha Mexican, and then the Japanese style, and then whatever Guido does in the sort of submission wrestling style. It's ECW had a bit of everything for everyone. It wasn't just hardcore, but the hardcore stuff was awesome. The flaming tables, the barbed wire, it was all great. And then of course you had Heyman with the shoot promo. Since you want to shoot, cowboy, the only reason you were WWE champion for a year is because Triple H didn't want to work Tuesdays. Good time. It was one of my favorite promos ever. Just hearing Heyman rip on WWE and all that. And also RVD's promo was really good too. Obviously RVD's not a great talker, but you could feel the real emotion in his voice as well when he talked. And he couldn't compete on that first One Night Stand. He had a knee injury. He did a small bit during the Sabu vs Rhino match. But yeah, both the One Night Stands, they were both awesome, awesome pay-per-views. So yeah, and so I'm covered a few of my favorites here. So just to recap quickly, I said my favorites. I have Backlash 2007, Unforgiven 2006, Survivor Series 2002, Money in the Bank 2011, Vengeance 2005, and we've just talked about One Night Stand. Yeah, and yeah, I can't agree more with the ECW reboot. I maintain, I don't think the reboot of the ECW, it wasn't a bad wrestling show. It was terrible ECW. It never should have been called ECW. I think if you brought it in under a different name, people wouldn't have had as much of a problem with it. But because you called it ECW, everyone expected the old ECW, and it just wasn't going to work. It was a bastardized version of what we all remembered and what the first One Night Stands showed us. You know, shit like the Zombie and people like Big Show and Lashley, they weren't what ECW was about. And yeah, RVD getting robbed smoking weed. It's funny because I don't think WWE are as mad about that anymore. I remember, I think it was Brian Kendrick. The fine for smoking weed was $1,000, and Kendrick kept getting fined for smoking weed, and he just didn't care. He just kept handing over the money, and I don't think they care as much now. I mean, 2021, I think it's legal in most places now. So yeah, but 2006 was a different time, and even then, like you still can't smoke and drive. I don't think. I'm Pretty sure that's still illegal. See, it's different here in Australia. It's not legal at all in Australia, where I am. Um, Wish it was, because I'm disabled and I've got my own pain issues. If I could smoke weed freely, that would be a massive help to me. But, it is what it is. But yeah, ECW under WWE umbrella didn't work. Still think it was a good show, it just wasn't ECW. Like, if you think about it, it was like a precursor to NXT. I think CM Punk on ECW worked well, Kofi Kingston, when Johnny Nitro became John Morrison. That was all good stuff, it just wasn't ECW. Alright, so I've still got a few shows to mention because the ones that are my top tier. Like I said, One Night Stand 2005 is my probably second favorite pay-per-view of all time. I'll talk about my absolute favorite in a second. Let me know, guys, what are some of your other favorite shows? That's what this is all about for me. This is about, I'm talking about my favorites, but I'd love to hear what your favorites are and talk about them as well. And while you're having to think about it or, writing stuff, I'll go to my next one, and my next one, SummerSlam 2013. I was back in WWE at this point. I had a few years off WWE. I didn't really watch between 2008 and 2012. By 2013, I was right back into it. Brock Lesnar brought me back. I know Brock Lesnar gets shit on for Suplex City and all that, but I feel like the first couple of years especially, he was really exciting. He was this sort of dangerous presence that WWE still didn't really have. They had they were still pretty PG WWE, but Brock Lesnar was a bit more vicious, a bit more brutal, so he was cool to see. So SummerSlam 2013, he faced CM Punk. It was the best versus the beast. Hey, TV Lemmies, I don't know if I said that right. Thanks for stopping by. Alright, yeah, so we're talking SummerSlam 2013. And so we had the best versus the beast. We had CM Punk versus Brock Lesnar. It was a no DQ match. You had this David versus Goliath story. CM Punk comes into the match with his crazy jiu-jitsu hoodie on, trying to beat an MMA hardman fighter. We saw what that looked like when he actually went to the UFC and got his ass kicked. But Lesnar was legit. And Punk and Lesnar did this David vs. Goliath story. Punk was throwing everything he could at Lesnar. Lesnar was still kicking ass. And then I think Punk started attacking the guts of Lesnar, which was a really cool story because Lesnar had the diverticulitis that stopped his UFC run. So for Punk to try and exploit that weakness by running him into the announce table and really attacking it, and even the playing field. Then you had Punk get involved. You had the submissions, the Kimura, the Anaconda Vice. And then ultimately we had Brock winning because Brock was being lined up to be put over strong. A few months later, he'd head into WrestleMania, he'd end the streak, then he'd go to SummerSlam the following year and destroy John Cena. So Lesnar beats Punk, but it was an awesome match. It's one of the best Brock Lesnar matches ever, and I think it's one of the best CM Punk matches that CM Punk had in WWE. You can probably go to Ring of Honor or whatever and find some better Punk matches too. But for my money, Punk vs. Lesnar, one of the best in WWE. So let me know what some of your favourite matches are, some of your favourite shows. Talking about favourite shows, obviously your favourite matches will probably be on your favourite shows as well. I'll probably do, now that I've got things sorted, I've finally got I've got to set up on a Twitch Studio beta. Hopefully my sound's coming through well. You guys can see me on the video. And so I'll do some more just chatting streams about different wrestling things, and we'll do a best matches ever one as well. This one's all about the best wrestling pay-per-views. I've mostly stuck to WWE, but there's a couple of other promotions incoming soon. But for now, we're going to look at the rest of the SummerSlam card first, because I've talked lots about Punk vs. Lesnar. But there was actually a bit of a double main event. We had Punk vs. Lesnar in the co-main, and the main event was Daniel Bryan versus John Cena for the WWE Championship. And that was great. The story wrote itself. You had Cena as like this corporate champion, Daniel Bryan as the underdog who didn't fit the mold of what a WWE superstar should be, but he got the opportunity here, and Bryan did it. He slayed the beast, had a really dramatic match. Cena was working with a messed up elbow. He had like a burst of sack in his elbow. There's pictures of it online. He had his whole elbow is just swollen like a tumor. So Cena worked with that, and he had this brilliant match with Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan beats John Cena clean with the running knee. 1, 2, 3. Daniel Bryan is your new WWE champion. The world rejoices, babies get thrown in the air, people hug, it's a good time. But not so fast. Randy Orton had the Money in the Bank briefcase. He comes down to cash in, and then the man that was special guest referee in the Cena Bryan match, Triple H, he called the match straight down the middle. You wouldn't know he was there. He wasn't much of a special guest referee at all. We just did his job as a normal zebra would. And then Triple H turned on Daniel Bryan. Triple H gave Daniel Bryan the pedigree. Orton cashes in Money in the Bank. 1, 2, 3. Daniel Bryan's first WWE Championship reign lasted all of about 5 minutes. So big twist ending to end the show. Maybe it didn't send the fans home happy, but it was a big shocking twist. And it sort of set the stage for what was to come with Daniel Bryan later, with the whole Yes Movement and WrestleMania 30. But yeah, you had a lot to love on SummerSlam 2013 besides those two big main events. You had the WWE debut of Bray Wyatt faced Kane in the Ring of Fire match, which is basically just an Inferno match. We had Del Rio versus Christian. I don't really like Alberto Del Rio very much at all, just as a performer or as a human being from what I've heard. But him and Christian had some good chemistry. They had a great match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Del Rio won that one. We had the Rhodes Scholars imploding, Cody Rhodes defeating Damian Sandow. And to show you like how stacked this card was, we had RVD on the pre-show. RVD returned to WWE about about a month before SummerSlam, sorry. He challenged Dean Ambrose for the United States Championship. Dean Ambrose was with the Shield at that point, and that match got on the pre-show. But I saw it, it was a damn good match. So that deserves a mention as well. Alright, I need a drink break because I've been talking a lot. Let me know what you're into so I can have a break and read and think about and discuss some of your picks for best wrestling pay-per-views. Alright, so we're into the nitty-gritty, like my sort of top 5 favorites at the moment. And one of my top 5 favorite ones ever, it's got to be WrestleMania 17. It's like universally regarded as the best WrestleMania ever, one of the best, if not the best pay-per-view ever. It's not my personal pick. It's right up there, but it's not my favorite. I think part of it is because as much as I love the Attitude Era, as much as I love that time period, I didn't actually get to watch WWE on a regular basis until about 2002. I was pretty poor growing up. We didn't have pay TV, which would allow me to watch Raw and SmackDown weekly. My exposure to wrestling was via VHS tapes. I'd go to the video store and borrow the events. And the thing about getting shows from the video store is that, especially back then when it was on video, not DVD and not Blu-ray, they were pretty slow in coming out. So everything I saw from like 1998 to 2002, I was at least 6 months behind on what was actually happening in current WWE. I don't think I saw WrestleMania 17 until after the Invasion angle was over. That's how behind I was. But it's a great show. I just don't have the same investment to it as some of my other picks because I wasn't watching the product full time at the time. But again, if you want to talk about a show having something for everyone, you had your massive main event, right? You had Austin vs. Rock for the WWF Championship. You see it right over my shoulder, that way. And actually, I really loved the Attitude Era WWE Championship. And I also loved the Ruthless Aggression WWE Championship, not the spinner one, but the one that Brock Lesnar and Eddie Guerrero had. That's my favorite WWE Championship design of all time. And yeah, but Austin Rock fighting over that Big Eagle WWF Championship. But yeah, that was the two biggest stars in the company going at it. Obviously, you have the big shock ending there with Austin aligning with Vince McMahon. But then you also had TLC 2 on the same show. You had Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit. You had Vince versus Shane in a street fight. You had the gimmick battle royal, so we had all these like legends come back, and it was played for laughs. But it's good because we had so much serious shit on the show that you needed something like watching Iron Sheik lumber around the ring and probably Heenan on commentary to have a good laugh. And then you had just a hardcore triple threat with Kane, Raven, Big Show. Apparently, Raven almost took power out to the show. Can't imagine how well that would have gone over backstage. You had Jericho versus William Regal, decent match. We had Eddie Guerrero versus Test. Just the undercard matches, but when you see the talent involved in just the undercard, so people like Chris Jericho and Eddie Guerrero just playing their little roles on the undercard, and all these big matches on top. WrestleMania 17 definitely deserves to be mentioned as one of the greatest of all time. Not my favorite, but it's right up there. Alright, and then that brings me to WrestleMania 19. WrestleMania 19 is my favorite WrestleMania of all time. I think, objectively, quality-wise, I think WrestleMania 19 and WrestleMania 17 are very close in quality. Objectively, WrestleMania 17 might be the better show. I think the undercard is stronger on 17 than 19. But again, it's just about investment. I was more invested in the 2003 product. I was watching Raw on a weekly basis, basically SmackDown most weeks, and seeing all the pay-per-views as they happened. In the main event, Angle vs Lesnar. I loved Brock Lesnar when he debuted. That 2002 Brock Lesnar was best Brock Lesnar. He's a killing machine. Kurt Angle, obviously, I had a ton of respect for, and I think this is around the time I was becoming privy to the dirt sheets. I knew that Kurt had a neck injury. Also knew that Austin had a neck injury, and he was having his last match ever with The Rock. Those were two massive matches. Then you had the street fight, Vince vs Hogan. I mean, that's a pretty direct mirror of Vince vs Shane, but different personality dynamic, different feud. But it was really well done. I mean, seeing Vince do a leg drop off a ladder through the announce table at 50 something years old, 55 or whatever he was at the time, just insane. And then, we also had the World Heavyweight Championship. It was like the one stain on the show, I guess, Triple H vs Booker T. When they make the feud to be that racist, which Triple H has just been overtly racist, it's one thing to do that and get heat, but to tell the story effectively, if your heel's going to be that much of an irritating bastard, he needs to lose at the end. Triple H winning clean against Booker T was one of the biggest booking crimes WWE has ever committed. I'm not even a huge Booker T fan. Like, he's alright. He's right there in the middle for me. But if you're gonna be a racist prick as a champion, you should lose that belt. That's storytelling 101. Because Triple H winning and winning clean, it almost vindicated him. It almost said, oh, look, Triple H was right about Booker T. He's just an entertainer. He can't win the big one. Because that's exactly what happened. Triple H had pedigree, waited about 30 seconds to pin him. That was the one black mark on the show. But it was still a well-wrestled match. It was still a good match. It just wasn't... The finish was the wrong finish, basically. And then you had like an early WrestleMania classic. So we had Shawn Michaels, who returned to WWE in 2002. That's going to come up very shortly. And so this was Shawn Michaels' first legitimate straight-up wrestling match back. He'd had the unsanctioned match at SummerSlam. He won the Elimination Chamber at Survivor Series. He had a 3 Stages of Hell match at Armageddon. Well, I think he might have had a match on Raw with RVD that was straight up. But this was like his first big time straight up singles match. HBK vs Y2J at WrestleMania 19, and it stole the show. They were just two absolute pros, two of the goats, going at it in one of my favorite matches ever. And it was like the 4th best match on the show, maybe 4th biggest match on the show. And yeah, so you can't say much more about that as far as being a great show. And then we had the WWE, the SmackDown Tag Team Championships on the line. Team Angle versus Los Guerreros versus Benoit and Rhino. It's kind of like I was saying about WrestleMania 17. Having stars of that caliber on the undercard like that speaks to what a strong show it was. It's a good match they had there. It wasn't a great match, but just seeing stars that level, that low on the card, and it not seeming really out of place because of how stacked the card was. That's a testament to how the card was booked and how strong it was. Then we had a triple threat match. We had Trish versus Victoria versus Jazz. Again, this was a good, 12, 13 years before the women's revolution. And Trish, Victoria, and Jazz effing killed it. Trish wins that one. Got a great WrestleMania entrance with the sort of confetti sparkler things that went pew, and the great substance and style mix. And I always had a soft spot for Trish. Yeah, soft spot. Yeah, let's go with that. So that was great. And then we had Undertaker in one of his weaker streak matches, but I still enjoyed it because it was Biker Undertaker, and I enjoyed Biker Undertaker. I don't care what you say, fight me. Biker Undertaker, the American Badass, was awesome. He comes to the ring on his motorbike, and he's accompanied by Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit. Limp Bizkit were the musical guests for WrestleMania 19, according to Tony Chimmel, WWE's favorite band in the whole wide world. And and the theme song for WrestleMania 19 was Crack Addict. Definitely not PG WWE. And so for Undertaker's entrance, he'd been using that dead man walking, you're going down, using that theme. But for one night only on WrestleMania, he got Roland back and Fred Durst did it live. Lots of swearing, lots of fireworks. It was a good time. And Undertaker wins in straightforward fashion, obviously. It's a streak match. He beats both Big Show and A-Train in the handicap match. It was originally meant to be a tag team match with Nathan Jones involved, but they determined that Nathan Jones was too green to get a WrestleMania match. Good call, he really was terrible, even though he is a fellow Aussie. He comes out to do like a spin kick in the match, and that leads to the finish. Undertaker goes 11-0 at that point, which shows how long ago it was. Okay. Also, I forgot to mention in the big matches on WrestleMania 17, we had Taker vs Triple H. Another great match. So much awesomeness on WrestleMania 17. I forgot to mention a key match, even though I've got it written down here. I'm trying not to read the notes too much. I want to try and do as much from memory as I can. But yeah, Taker vs Triple H at WrestleMania 17. Big oversight on my part. But I think I've covered every match at WrestleMania 19, with the exception of the opener, Cruiserweight Championship. Rey Mysterio makes his WrestleMania debut, dressed as the Daredevil, taking on V1 Matt Hardy with Shannon Moore, the moron. No, Shannon Moore was an MFer. Shannon Moore's followers were morons. So that's when Crash Holly became a moron later on. You gotta love it. You gotta love those silly bits in WWE. And I loved the version 1 gimmick. I loved the Matt facts. Actually, my first forum username was inspired by Matt Hardy version 1. Mine was Shane O'Mac version 2. And yeah, so we had that. And also we had the Miller Lite Catfight Girls. And Tori and Stacy got involved in that. And that was your bit of sexuality to go with the violence and the action and the mayhem on WrestleMania 19. Alright, we are now at the first non-WWE pay-per-view on my list, and it's AEW's first pay-per-view, Double or Nothing. So obviously at the start of 2019, when they announced AEW was going to be a promotion, it was very exciting. They did the rally in Jacksonville. Chris Jericho showed up to that along with the Elite Boys, sort of proving, okay, this is serious. They got a star, the caliber of Chris Jericho on board. This is the real deal. Chris Jericho main evented against Kenny Omega, so a rematch from Wrestle Kingdom. We had Jericho vs Omega 2. We also had a great tag team war between the Young Bucks and the Lucha Bros. We had this really emotional brother versus brother match, Cody versus Dustin Rhodes. This is before Cody was allowed to use his last name. And then we had a lot of influences from different promotions. We had the Strong Hearts from OWE in the opening match against SCU. SCU got the big win, of course, being the full-time roster members. We had the 6-woman Joshi tag, Hikaru Shida's first appearance. She won that match. It was great. And then even on the pre-show had some good stuff. We had the first ever Casino Battle Royal, which of course Hangman Page won. And then we had the first straight up singles match in AEW was Kip Sabian versus someone you might know a bit today, Sammy Guevara, who's made a bit of a name for himself since joining AEW. And also we had the women's division was represented. Britt Baker versus Kylie Ray versus Nyla Rose. And then Awesome Kong got involved. Brady Rhodes comes out and introduces Awesome Kong, which is a huge surprise. We thought Awesome Kong was retired from wrestling. She is a star on Glow, so that was a great little incentive there. You also had a great tag match between Best Friends and TH2. You also had Bret Hart on the show, which was huge. And of course, there's something what happened at the end of the show. Oh yeah, so after the main event, so Chris Jericho beats Kenny Omega, Judas Effect, I'm pretty sure. Yep, and Jericho gets on the mic. He demands all the thanks and praise for making AEW successful. And next minute, Jon Moxley runs through the audience, and everyone loses their minds. And the former Dean Ambrose in WWE makes his back known. He takes out Jericho. He takes out Omega. He spikes Omega on the casino chips on the stage with the dirty deeds and throws him off the chips. It's like a Death Valley driver through the table. And you've got JR on commentary, and he was the most invested in the Cody Dustin bloodbath, but he also got really invested in the finish of Moxley as he yells, "How do you like AEW now?" Because even JR knew that having Moxley on board and having that be the show closing image was a huge deal for AEW. Honestly, AEW have had some great pay-per-views along the way. Double or Nothing in 2019 is my favourite by far. Full Gear was really great as well. Revolution was really good as well. I mean, some people say that's the greatest AEW pay-per-view. I wasn't feeling it that much, but it was cool seeing Mox win. It was cool seeing Cody versus MJF. My favourite match of the night was Pac versus Orange Cassidy, but I didn't think the top two matches delivered the way they should have. Of course, we had the brilliant, classic tag team match between Kenny Omega and Hangman Page versus the Young Bucks. That would have been the best match on the show, actually, followed by Pac versus Cassidy. But yeah, Mox versus Jericho and Cody versus MJF, they were built up really well. I didn't think the matches lived up to the hype. We already talked about my second favourite earlier, ECW One Night Stand 2005, which brings me to my favourite pay-per-view of all time. Happened in 2002, right at the height of the Ruthless Aggression era, or right at the beginning of the Ruthless Aggression era. It was SummerSlam 2002. I maintain that's the perfect wrestling show. If I had to show a non-wrestling fan one show, I would choose one show to show them, it would be SummerSlam 2002. It opens with Kurt Angle versus Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio's WWE pay-per-view debut. He showed up in WWE about a month earlier. And at this point, when I first saw SummerSlam 2002, I saw it like a few days after it happened from a videotape from a friend. I hadn't seen Rey Mysterio in WCW, so to see Rey Mysterio versus Kurt Angle, I was just in awe of all the crazy flippy shit this masked dude could do. Kurt Angle, of course, was Kurt Angle. And the thing that trips me up most about this match is I only realized, sort of looking back, doing research for it, back when I wrote my article about my top 10 favorite pay-per-views. Kurt Angle vs Rey Mysterio was only about 8 minutes long, but it was the most action-packed 8 minutes of wrestling you will ever see in your life. It was brilliant. My favorite opening match on a show ever. Then we had our Battle of Goats, Hall of Famer Ric Flair versus future Hall of Famer Chris Jericho. Like I said, Hall of Famer. So Flair's already in the Hall of Fame twice. Chris Jericho's headed there, as long as Vince doesn't get too butthurt about the whole AEW thing. Alright, then we had Eddie Guerrero vs Edge. Again, Battle of Hall of Famers. They had an awesome match. Both men looking to prove themselves. Both had a bit of a chip on their shoulder. Eddie was returning after getting fired from WWE due to his substance abuse issues. Edge was a star on the rise, split from Christian. He was being built as one of the faces of SmackDown. He gets the big win over Latino Heat at SummerSlam. RVD versus Chris Benoit. It's a battle for the Intercontinental Championship. It's an interpromotional match because Chris Benoit joined SmackDown, but he took the IC title with him. RVD wins with the Frog Splash to take the IC title to Raw. Great match, like the intensity of Chris Benoit and the hard hitting and the technical moves versus the high flying, innovating offensive RVD. You gotta love it. Great tag team championship match, Booker T and Goldust. An odd couple, but they made it work. Versus the Un-Americans, that was great. And Taker vs Test, not so great, but I liked Test, he was okay. And again, Black Undertaker, always on board for that. And then that brings us to the top two matches, which we've already had an awesome card all the way through, stacked of Hall of Famers and great matches. But then we had the return of Shawn Michaels. After 4 years out of the game, 4.5 years out, with a broken back, Shawn Michaels returns to action in this unsanctioned match, so basically a street fight against the game Triple H. And he didn't miss a beat. It was one of the greatest matches I've ever seen. Definitely the greatest comeback match ever. Shawn Michaels was flawless. He took all the risks. Triple H was a sadistic bastard at his best, attacking Shawn Michaels back at every turn with steel chairs and anything else he can get his hands on. Ultimately, Shawn Michaels wins the roll up, the miraculous comeback story. And then after the match, Triple H is a downright bastard, hitting Shawn Michaels with a sledgehammer, living up to his promise to cripple his former best friend. Then the main event was a passing of the torch, Rock versus Brock. Like I said earlier, I loved 2002 Brock Lesnar. He was just an absolute beast, no pun intended. And Brock was fucking off to Hollywood, we all knew it, but they still made this match super dramatic. They had these great montages where they were training and showing the intense training sessions both Rock and Brock are going through, very different styles of training. You had Rock in always elite, sort of technical gym expertise. You had Brock Lesnar being the classic farm boy, running around with logs on his shoulder because he's that much of a badass and didn't give any fucks. And he had to have a really good, pretty straightforward, but still really good match, very smooth. And Rock gets booed just about out of the building in Long Island. Brock's basically the default babyface. And ultimately, after a little bit of do-si-dos, trading finishes, Brock Lesnar hits the F5, pins Rock in the middle of the ring. 1, 2, 3. We have a new WWE Undisputed Champion. We have a new era. The next big thing has arrived. It's the perfect wrestling show. I could watch it again and again and again. And I have. Alright, so those are my favorite matches of all. I keep saying matches. Those are my favorite pay-per-views of all time. My favorite one ever, SummerSlam 2002, followed closely by ECW One Night Stand 2005, followed by AEW Double or Nothing, followed by WrestleManias 19 and 17, and then you've got a bit of a crapshoot for the rest. My name's Robbo. Thanks for stopping by. I'm going to be doing some more just chatting streams about different wrestling topics. Really hope to see some of you guys around there. Really appreciate everyone who stopped by and added to the chat. Hope you all have a great night or day, wherever you are in the world. Till next time, take care.